Quick housekeeping item before we get underway. This coming week, not tomorrow, but starting on Tuesday, Maritime Christian College, my old alma mater, where I went to Bible college, is having their lectureships. I think this is the first time in a few years. Since 2020, so that whole COVID thing, maybe you all heard about that, kind of shut things down for a bit. But they are finally having it. It's happening at the Sherwood Christian Church in Sherwood. I don't know where that is. You haven't lived in Charlottetown for very long because it's not a big place. But it's 9 Mile Ag Avenue, please Google map it. They have morning sessions at 9:30 each morning till noon. Usually those involve snacks halfway through. I think Ellen has been baking muffins for the last 12 weeks. No, she says it's really all of her putting it all together. But there's some great topics to be discussed. So if you can make it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you can't make it in the morning, they have evening sessions starting at 7:30. There's usually a bit of a worship time and then a bit of a sermon time. I don't know the speaker at all, but I do know his background is in coaching too. So I'm sure there's going to be more than one sports analogy. And hopefully, well, he's probably American, so he probably doesn't know anything about hockey. Probably more football, related stuff. But yeah, he's holding the football. Yeah, very, very American picture here. But I'm sure it will be fantastic, and I encourage you all, if you can make it out, check it out, and have yourselves a great week. I am not sure how many of you decided to get up early yesterday morning to watch the coronation of the new King of England. Most people I spoke to were like, oh, that was today? They forgot about it. My siblings were just like, oh, shoot. But I guess officially, Charles was made the king the moment that Queen Elizabeth passed away. But the royals, they sure do like their pomp and ceremony. We here over in Canada, we don't really get the UK's fascination with this family, but I've heard it compared to our Hollywood over here. They have their royal family with all of the drama that entails there. And we have our celebrities here who have way more sway and influence with their limited intelligence that should allow any of that. But it happens. People have different opinions about the royals, the way our system of government is set up. Lots of discussion lately about severing ties, perhaps sooner than later. Personally, I think the ties we have is the least of our problems with the way our government operates, but that's another story for another day. Many disagree with Canada even being under the monarchy of England still, but there's still a connection there to the point where perhaps you've been reading about it, that the face of the Queen, it still resides on the backs of our currency today. For those of you unsure of what that is, cash is something that we used to use in the olden days, back before things like the internet and indoor plumbing was invented, all right? But there's talk now about this whole process of changing to the image of Charles's head. Might have to digitally shrink his ears a little bit to fit on there. But also, I thought, by the time this whole process is begun and done, I mean, Charles is not a young man to start this whole kingship. They may as well start printing money off with William on it, to save the taxpayers some money. I don't know. I just find the whole thing interesting. Francine thought, are you still watching this? It's so boring. But I find it interesting to observe all the rigmarole that they go through for such an event like this. The customs, the traditions involved in the coronation, they go back centuries. They've changed a few things, of course. They tried to cut back the time, actually, a little bit. They built an updated carriage with actual, shocks, and so they're not just bumping up and down on wooden planks like that. They involved various members of the multi-faith community. I thought that was interesting, rather than just the Church of England doing everything. But the flair, the hoopla, it abounded. The long speeches, the music, the bestowing of the royal ring and the scepter, the wearing of traditional royal clothes, that big furry cape he had on. And of course, the official transference and the laying on of the crown. So whenever you think of the ceremonies and the dressing up and all the fanfare, the royals, they sure do know how to spice things up and throw a spectacular party. And now England officially has its new king. Actually, when we last left off a couple of weeks ago, Jesus had used his incredible power over the natural world, and he broke the laws of physics to use a small handful of loaves and a couple of fish to make enough food to feed multiple thousands of people. He made so much that every person there that day, they had a full belly, and there were more leftover baskets of food than there were to begin with. You thought your mom was amazing by being able to feed the whole family with nothing but a pound of hamburger and a bag of potatoes. This feed was nothing short of miraculous. And the people there that day, they knew it. They witnessed an event so incredible, so mind-blowing, that they deduced that this Jesus guy just had to be someone of importance. Perhaps even sent by God himself as a prophet. And so a bunch of these people, they put their heads together and they had this impromptu business meeting. And they're like, this guy, there's something special about him. Yeah. He's obviously not just a regular human like us. No. I mean, look at what he did. I've never eaten that much food in my life. So we need to do something. We need to hang on to this guy. In fact, because of what he's able to do, we should make him our king. Well, what if he doesn't want to be our king? Well, that's just too bad. I mean, he can do all these amazing things. He can do so much good for us. We will never go hungry again with him as our leader. And so this meeting concludes, and the decision to make Jesus their king was made, whether he wanted the job or not. But Jesus knew exactly what was going on. He actually knew their plans before they even did. And as they talked and they made motions and seconded them and all that, he quietly slipped away and disappeared into the hills behind him. I don't know, maybe he turned invisible. Maybe he changed his form into a tree or into a bird to just sit on the rock and watch them talk about it. What we do know is that he was not going to allow them to force him to become a king. He already was a king, after all. He was the king of the universe. But God's plan was not for him to sit on a throne. It was to eventually hang on a cross. Not something your typical king usually did. And so off Jesus went. And here's where we pick up in John 6, verses 16 and 17. That evening, Jesus' disciples went down to the shore to wait for him. But as darkness fell and Jesus still hadn't come back, they got into the boat and headed across the lake toward Capernaum. Now, before you think that Jesus' disciples just kind of abandoned him here, all right, this was something they were actually told to do. It almost sounds here like they just went down to the shore and they waited a bit for Jesus to come back to them. But as it got late and the sun began to go down, they just got impatient and decided to leave without him, right? Oh, we got to get home before dark. Our moms are going to be worried, right? But remember, this is one person's perspective. This is John's perspective of what happened. And he tells his readers here what he thought was important. We all observe things uniquely, right? Which is cool to see the various sides of this whole story from 4 different accounts that were given. But we're all different. Francine does not pay very close attention to what our car actually looks like. We'll be walking through the parking lot and she'll start heading towards a red SUV that is not ours. Happened yesterday, until I finally look around. Where is she? Francine, that's not our car. She has even started getting into other people's cars, all right? Thinking it was ours. Well, I stand and watch and laugh a little bit at the dude in the front seat looking kind of surprised at this woman getting into his car. But she just doesn't pay that close attention to what our car really looks like. She does know that it's red, though. That's impressive. But the gospel writers, they paid attention to different details. And if you read the other accounts about this tale, we find out that Jesus had actually told his guys to head back without him. He went off by himself into the hills to pray. And we hear that, and one might think why God in the flesh needed to pray, needed to talk to God, but that's a whole theological discussion we're not going to touch right now. But it seems like in his human form, Jesus the Son spoke with God the Father in the same manner that he taught us to do. But he says, you fellas, you guys go on ahead of me, and you take the boat, and you go on off to the other side. Don't worry, I'll catch up. And while some of them may have thought, we have the only boat, how are you going to catch up? Jesus was their rabbi. Jesus had just fed a ton of people from virtually nothing. They just weren't going to question him at this time. But then as they begin to cross the waters, something comes up. Soon a gale swept down upon them, and the sea grew very rough. They had rowed 3 or 4 miles when suddenly they saw Jesus walking on the water toward the boat. They were terrified, but he called out to them, "Don't be afraid, I am here." So a strong wind started blowing across the sea. And when a gale like that hits the waters and you're in a little boat, that boat starts a-rocking quite a bit. Now, I grew up here on PEI, and I remember the time before the bridge was built. A lot of you probably do too. And the only way to get across to the mainland was by ferry. I hate boats, all right? The movement makes me sick. I would not have made a good fisherman. I don't like boats. I don't like the smell of fish. Kind of makes me want to hurl a little bit. But I remember going across and the water, some of those times being quite rough, especially in the winter when the boat would have to back up, remember that, and take a run at the ice, bang, 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 to break it up. Oh, fun times. And so to distract me and distract my poor stomach, I would often bring a pocket full of quarters and go and play at the arcade the entire time. It worked like a charm. But the disciples, they were not on a large ferry. They were in a little boat in a huge storm. This water was bouncing off them, up and down like they were on a ride at Disneyland. Waves just crashing down around them, soaking them to their skin, nearly overturning their vessel over and over again. And then, as they were working so hard to steer and to row towards the safety of the land, they noticed something. They noticed something else out in the water with them. No, not a huge shark fin coming and a cello playing in the background. Dun, 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 dun. No! John tells us right away that it was Jesus. But the other gospel writers, they build some suspense here. Matthew and Mark, they both inform us that the disciples thought that this figure out in the water was actually a ghost. I don't know, maybe they were all binge watching the paranormal activity movies and it was all freaking them out. But their brains were having a hard time, understandably so, processing what their eyes were showing them. Because in the middle of this scary storm, with the wind howling and the waves hitting them like mad, they see this figure, this person coming towards them. And oh yes, he's not in another boat. This being is actually walking towards them on foot in the middle of the lake. This would not have been a big deal if it had been in Canada in February. But folks, this water was wet. Thankfully, they figure out fairly quickly that this figure is Jesus. Their terror turns to relief as he calls out to them, "Hey guys, it's just me. Don't be afraid. I'm here." And when the disciples are finally able to see through the darkness, see through the storm, see through their fears and their questions, they realize who it is right there with them. And I love the way John sums up this story. Verse 21. Then they were eager to let him in the boat. And immediately they arrived at their destination. When the guys figured out who it was, they simply couldn't wait to invite him in. I don't know what your journey has been in figuring out who Jesus is. Perhaps you are still on that journey and you're maybe interested in him. You're fascinated by some of his works and his teachings, but you're still unsure of some of his claims. My journey was always a skeptical one. So I understand your questions and not wanting to just jump in and accept things, accept what other people say. I grew up going to church, unwillingly usually, but I still went, but I never really got anything out of it. It just seemed like a bunch of tradition steeped in religious talk and wrapped up in jargon and music and ceremony that just did not connect with me. Much more make any sense or seem to have any real usefulness in the real world. But as I grew older and I met some more people, I was challenged to actually search for myself what the Bible actually said about these things. Now, I leaned towards believing that there was a God. I looked at the world, I looked at the universe, and just saw everything was so big, so complex, that there just seemed to have been a handprint of an intelligent designer on it. I tell you, watching all that space stuff on TV, it gives you a picture of what the universe is really like. It is massive out there. But the God that I was shown at church didn't seem to be all that big. He actually seemed pretty small. He was confined to a musty old building. And he appeared irrelevant, out of touch with life. And so I always asked questions, but never really got any answers. Until I met some Jesus followers who were different from the church folk that I was used to. And when I read the Bible for myself, and I took in what Jesus did and what he talked about in the New Testament, I learned more about God then than I did in my entire life prior to that. I discovered that faith wasn't about just keeping a set of rules that were in front of me. It was about having a heart centered on the right things. Jesus taught about how life was meant to be lived out to its fullest and to have peace, to experience joy, not be confined to a simple religion based on traditions and doing things just because we were supposed to do them. I asked questions. I wrestled through my doubts, and it took time. But the love of the people in my life who cared about me, and this incredible story of Jesus that I kept studying, eventually changed my life. I had kind of a neat experience last Sunday. We didn't have a service here at the hall, thanks to the Raincourts for having us out in New Dominion for that fantastic barbecue. And the floors, Hazel, look great. You did a great job. Good job on that. Hope your back's okay. But I am normally out the door on Sunday mornings at like 8 a.m. I'm bringing stuff over here. I'm getting things set up. Then we have a practice, you know. But last week, I kind of felt like a fish out of water. Like I was constantly late for something, right? Like I should be somewhere. It was really weird for me, just kind of sitting around home waiting to go. But around 10 o'clock, Francine was making some muffins, and she asked me to run to Shoppers for eggs. Apparently eggs are on sale at Shoppers on the weekend, so I'll go get some eggs. But I hopped in the car, and I headed over, no problem. And I noticed something that I don't usually do at that time because I am normally busy, right? Everyone was home. There was virtually no traffic at all, which I thought was awesome, all right? But there was no cars on the road because they were all parked in their driveways. Shoppers Drug Mart was completely empty. There were barely any people outside. You know, a couple of guys out raking a few leaves. Our neighbor next door, she was out jogging up the street. But for the most part, it was this eerie and surreal feeling. And it hit home to me very hard that barely anyone in this city goes to church. Not because they're working, not because they're busy, they were just home. One author and pastor that I follow, he gave some advice to people in ministry like myself that I understand now. It took me a few years to get what he was saying. He said, when you take vacation time, and you don't have to be there to lead or to preach or whatever, don't actually go somewhere else. Don't go to another church and visit on Sunday. He said, just stay home and sleep in. Because that is your competition. And I get it. Because it's nice to relax, right? It's nice to take it easy, to not have anywhere to go. And so to convince people to get up and come out and go to church somewhere, that's a big ask. I've been to enough church services that honestly were kind of terrible, where I had to mentally focus my brain hard in order to pay attention and try and get something out of what was being presented. I know, I'm old enough now, I'm a bit wiser. I know you don't have to entertain people to hold their attention, but realistically, I enjoy listening to sermons and stuff like that. I know I'm a nerd. But if I have to struggle to pay attention, if it's a chore to try and draw something from what I'm hearing, then I know that most people around me are long gone. They're on their phones. They're checking Facebook. They're checking the hockey scores to see if the Leafs finally got booted out of the playoffs like they deserve. Not forget that. But I know it is a tough sell to ask people to come to church. Because their experience might be like mine was. That it makes no sense to them. They tried it years ago. It has little to no purpose. It has no relevance to their life. I get that. And that, my friends, is why, if you consider yourself to be a follower of Jesus. It is up to us, you and me, to present Jesus to others that make him seem interesting, attractive. Like his disciples, when they were able to see through the darkness, to look past the distractions, and they were able to see Jesus for who he really was, then they were eager to invite him into the boat. That's what it's like for everyone. And we need to help people look past all these things. Look past their backgrounds and their history and all the stuff in life that takes our attention away from the things that are truly important. So that we can begin to help the people in our lives see Jesus for who he really is. Because then, and only then, will they be eager to invite him into their life as well. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the display of your incredible power here at work. Jesus feeding these thousands of people, of being able to break the laws of physics and walk on water. Something you can do with barely a thought, but it blows our minds to see your power, your awesomeness at work. But Father, thank you for this story showing the humanness of his disciples. Their fear, their terror of not understanding something. The questions that they asked, the doubts that they had when presented with something they didn't understand. Because Father, we have people like that in our lives. We are people like that. But because of what life throws at us, because of the distractions, the sin that so easily drags us down, we can have doubts, we can have questions, we cannot understand why things are the way they are. And when we're presented with religious things, we can scoff at them, we can roll our eyes, and decide that it really has nothing to do with real life. I just pray, Father, that you would help us all to understand Jesus for who he really is. Not just another rule giver, but someone who came down to display your love and to show us grace and mercy that we've never seen before. And I pray that you would help us all to share Jesus, whom he really is, with everybody around us, so that they can see that love, they can see that light, and they too would be eager to discover him as well. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Let's all stand together.
Lay down your burden. There's hope for the hopeless. No one's to stay. Sit at the table, come taste the grace. There's rest for the weary. Rest that endures. Earth has no sorrow and heaven can endure. Lay down your burden. Lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up today. Oh, wanderer, come home. You're not too far. So lay down your burden, lay down your heart. Come as you are. Come as you are. All in His arms. Come as you are. There's hope for the morning. Oh, sinner, be still. 'Cause earth has no sorrow, and heaven can feel. Earth has no sorrow, and heaven can feel. Lay down your burden. Lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up today. Oh, wanderer, come home. You're not too far. So lay down your burden, lay down your heart. Come as you are. Yes, come as you are. Oh, come as you are. Yes, come as you are.
Thanks for being here today. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, the rest of your week, and remember about the lectures this week by Maritime Christian College held at Sherwood Christian Church in the